Well, hello and welcome everyone. And thank you so much to Fanny, Eric, and Ellen for being here with us for our very last webinar series in conversation with. My name is Joyce, and I'm the chair of the CorpusCALL SIG group. And today we have Jasper here, who will be the moderator of the talk. Just sort of as a recap on how this will go. So basically, the series was meant for basically researchers, teachers, students, anyone who's interested in the topic of corpus linguistics to come and sort of engage in a conversation with, hence the title of this webinar series, with some experts in the field. So this isn't meant to be sort of a seminar, webinar of any sort where we listen and we ask questions. Certainly we can, but this is for this is a chance for anyone in this room and all the participants to sort of engage in a conversation with some of the experts in the field. So yeah, anything related to some of the questions that we have prepared, Jasper has prepared, to any sort of lingering questions or topics that you feel that you would want to discuss. And this goes for the speakers as well. If there's anything that you would like to ask the participants, that is also good as well. And here we also have Rekha and Peter. So I'll quickly just share slide just to kind of share with everyone who we are. So again, we are part of the CorpusCALL SIG groups. We are part of the EuroCall. So I'm the chair. We have Jasper here. He's the secretary. Peter here as ordinary member, and Rekha as liaison officer. And then we also have Eva, who will be maybe joining us in a bit. She is our communications officer. So this is sort of a new webinar series that we've recently launched. And I will now pass over to Jasper, who will be moderating the session.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, it's a great pleasure for me to be here and to present to you the three people we're going to have our conversation with today. So we have Elen Le Foll, Eric Nicaise, and Fanny Meunier. I'll briefly introduce them and then we'll dive right into it, I suggest. So Ellen is a postdoctoral researcher and lecturer at the University of Cologne in Germany. Her research interests include corpus-based analysis of learner language, creation of corpus-informed learning materials, quantitative corpus linguistics methods, and corpus literacy in education. And on top of that, she's also a conference interpreter and holding a bachelor's degree in music, which leaves me wondering if there's something that Ellen can't do, really. Right, our second guest is Eric Nicaise. He's a teacher, trainer, and lecturer in Dutch and English at the University College of Louvain-en-Hainaut in Belgium. His main research interests are teacher development, phonology of English as a foreign language, and the implications of second language acquisition studies for the English language classroom. He's also authored a book in which he used corpora to study native versus non-native teacher talk in the classroom of English as a foreign language, which is just a perfect illustration, I think, of his expertise in the field of corpus linguistics. And last but not least, it's my honor to present Fanny Meunier, who's a full professor of English linguistics and didactics at the Catholic University of Louvain in Belgium. Her research interests include fundamental, applied, and instructed second language acquisition, and bi, multi, and plurilingualism. She has an extensive expertise in the topic of teaching with corpora in the human-machine era, and given her experience as a teacher, I think her insights, the insights she can provide us with, are as comprehensive as they'll ever get. All right, I hope I didn't spread any fake news about our three guests, and I suggest we start things off with a kind of icebreaking question, let's say, and then we'll see where the conversation brings us. So please, if you have any questions, remarks, or whatever, just raise your virtual hand or post the question in the chat, and Joyce will monitor the chat and ask the question to our speakers then. Great. The first question is a very broad one about how we see and define corpus linguistics in general. And to provide some pointers to start from, I thought it could be interesting to just read the Wikipedia definition of corpus linguistics. Perhaps it's a bit old-fashioned because nowadays the most popular option would be asking Chat GPT, I guess. But old school can be cool as well, right? So just go with that with Wikipedia. Okay, according to Wikipedia, the corpus linguistics is the study of a language as that language is expressed in text corpora, which contain real word text of that language. So Ellen, Eric, and Fanny, your thoughts? What do corpora and corpus linguistics mean to you?
Who starts? Ellen, go first.
Okay, Ellen.
All right, perhaps just as a reaction to that definition, it implied that the corpus has to be in one language, and we do now have multilingual corpora. So I think maybe that would be a slight change I would make to that definition. But yes, a corpus is a collection of text, and I think it's maybe important to also mention that text, our understanding of text generally for linguists is not just the written word, but we have a corpora of audio material, of video material now, and this is becoming more and more a thing that we can also use corpus linguistic methods to not just look at written words, but also we have signed language corpora, so these are definitely video based corpora. So text is a very broad term, and a collection of text is also a very broad term. But when we explore a corpus, so a collection of text for corpus linguistic purposes, then it does have to meet certain properties. It has to have a certain amount of metadata. It has to be formatted in a way that we can process the data using corpus linguistic methods. So a random collection of text on someone's laptop is not a corpus yet, but it could turn into a corpus.
Maybe one thing, but it's similar to what Ellen has just said. I wanted to point the multimodality potential of corpora, so multilingual, multimodal, and also the metadata. And that makes it very different from other data types, is that you have metadata, you know who's been producing, well, most of the time, in what context, under what conditions, and that makes it very, very specific. It's not just a bunch of text, it's just a bunch of text written by certain people in a certain context for certain purposes.
And I think in addition to what Ellen and Fanny said, I think what's great about corpus linguistics is there's such a great variety of corpora around. It can be nationally bound, it can be standard British English versus American British English, or it can be locally oriented. It can be a corpus for Dublin or Quebec, for example, in French Canada. It can be time specific too. Continuous versus historical. It can be context dependent, so academic versus non-academic corpora. And well, speaker informed, so produced by speakers of English, native English speaking teachers or speakers or learners, and then the whole area of learner corpora, which we can talk about later on. But to me, what is great in corpus linguistics is that it gives us an authentic description of the language rather than an impressionistic view of language. It's not based on guesswork. It is scientific work indeed. And as such, it allows to describe language in a much more accurate way than we did in the past.
Right, great. Perhaps you mentioned authenticity, Eric, and actually, I think, in my opinion as well, that's to me one of the core aspects of corpora. So be it native or non-native data, corpora can really be said to represent authentic language use. So perhaps a good question here is, will that change in the future? Because now AI tools have proven to be able to generate like quite surprisingly well-written text, and those could very well end up in digital corpora in the end. And the question is, the authentic character of corpora, will this still remain then? Perhaps as a next question.
Yeah, I can volunteer to start the answer for that one. I think when I listened to episode 2, I think of the webinar, and I think Alex Bolton said, corpora gives you access to the intuitions of hundreds of people, because it's more than the intuition, it's their production. And talking about ChatGPT, I would say that this idea of authenticity, to me, is a crucial and very interesting question. And I would be a bit bold and say perhaps that ChatGPT is not so inauthentic, at least in terms of language analysis, because it's a large language model and it's been working with billions of texts produced by real people. So the initial texts were produced by real people. And the capacity that ChatGPT has ChatGPT, the best skill that ChatGPT has is this analysis of the patterns of language. It's doing that. It's analyzing all the patterns of language, and so guessing what words come after the other one, etc., etc. So I think it's, in a way, it's one way of representing authentic language in an inauthentic way. But it's based on corpora. It's based on language produced by real people, and it's analyzed all those connections and patterns. So in a way, a corpus is limited in terms of number of words, and it's only a part of, a small part of a specific text type. So ChatGPT can give you something, you said, that looks very authentic, so I'll just launch the debate, and I would say that is in a way authentic. So it has plenty of faults. I'm not saying it's good, but it has plenty of faults. But it's, in terms of authenticity, to me, it's not necessarily less authentic than language produced by other people. What it doesn't have is the learner aspect, because it's mostly based on native texts, and it doesn't have the metadata that corpora have, and that's the strongest point of corpora. So launching the debate, I'm letting other people reply.
No, I would very briefly agree with Fanny in that, well, the internet is the largest corpus available in the world. So effectively, by consulting ChatGPT, we are consulting and resorting to corpora. So the language analysis is going to be based on corpora from the word go when we use ChatGPT, indeed, because it's a whole set of corpora that ChatGPT is tapping into when you ask information.
Yeah, I think I would start with the fact that I'm not sure authenticity is always very easy to define, especially in learner corpus research. Many of our corpora are examinations, and we can argue as to whether this is an authentic setting for human beings to be in, and whether they therefore produce authentic language in that setting. So I think authenticity is a difficult term in any way, even though I of course agree that it is also an advantage that we have this natural language data. Regarding sort of AI models producing text, I think we need to be quite careful about a number of things. I mean, what Fanny described is of course correct, the way the texts are generated. In a way, it's corpus-based. I don't think we can assume that all the texts are human-produced, the ones that have been fed into ChatGPT. I think many of them will already be, for instance, machine translations. And I think we're dealing with a very English-centric model. And so I don't know if you've played around with it in French or in German or in the other language that you're proficient in, and you can really see that it's learned from English text and it's trying to produce something else. And I think that's going to be potentially problematic if you want to use that data. So in English, yes, perhaps, but in other languages, I'm not so convinced. And as Fanny mentioned, we don't have the metadata. We really don't have any idea what's gone into ChatGPT. So it's a black box. And I think for us as corpus linguists, that's a huge problem, that we just
Yeah,
don't
exactly.
know what's happening. On the other hand, what we could say it will become authentic is if we, for instance, analyze learner essays in future, ones that are not done in exam conditions, under supervised exam conditions, they are likely to include segments or entire passages produced by ChatGPT. And here I would say, yes, it is still authentic language in the sense that that is what they produced, that is what they handed in. And we can analyze that too, and that could be interesting too, because we can then see what kind of proofreading strategies they used, how they may be modified the output of the machine. And I think those would be fascinating research questions that we can answer with corpus linguistic methods. So it has a lot of potential for us too, future research questions.
Yeah, and also, as you said, that the term authenticity is difficult to define, and even in the past, I mean, nothing is authentic from one person, because we've read other texts, we've been talking to other people. So any one of our production is the result of, you know, previous productions, things we heard, input we had in whatever format. So authenticity is difficult to define. And there's one definition I read, I listened to, it was a webinar recently, and can't remember who said it. I think it's Krashen, who defined authenticity as something which is meaningful. It's meaningful communication. You communicate for a reason, and that's authenticity. And that's well, you need to have a webinar number 5, 6, 7, and 8 on authenticity only. I think that would be good.
Interesting.
I think what's important also, Jasper, that I'm a bit digressing a bit, but talking about learner corpora and learner dictionaries, it's where you find authentic language in those dictionaries that you didn't have in the past. And for example, knowing that the learner's Oxford Dictionary, so at B1 level, is based on a word list of 3,000 words at that level, and they use only, it's a corpus-based word list, and knowing that they only use those words to compile a dictionary, to me, is authentic. And if we step up to a C1 level, we can then consult the 5,000 word list from Oxford, and then access another kind of dictionary. But I think it's so important also at their level to be well, conscious level for teachers too, and knowing what kind of language is authentic at intermediate and higher up, so to speak. And also maybe in terms, yeah, sorry, Fanny.
No, go for it, finish.
Okay, no, I was also thinking of assessment. Because course books nowadays are based on corpora, I think it would make sense also in terms of learner corpora to think of appropriate assessment based on corpora too. So when learners are assessed globally, those examinations over the world, across borders, it would make sense if textbooks are well written and are corpora based, so based on corpora, that the assessment we give to learners should be based on corpora too. And that's a question of representation there. What kind of language we put in our course books, and then accordingly the language targeted at particular subgroups of learners when we assess them.
Perhaps I'll react to the textbook passage, because that's something I've done a lot of work on. Certainly the markets that I've looked at, so I've looked at the national markets in France, Germany, and Spain, so secondary school and even primary school markets of textbooks, and those are definitely not corpus based, unfortunately. So I think we're still a long way away from that, but for the global ELT market, especially in adult education, then there are of course Anglo-Saxon publishers in particular that are now using more and more corpora, which is great. But I think it's far from a norm, unfortunately. I think Eric, what you were suggesting is really interesting. my sort of initial worry, without having thought about it for very long, a few seconds, is whether we might risk some kind of a standardization. And I'm worried about some sort of backlash effect of then students trying their best to squeeze their language production into a specific model that they know that's the only way they're going to get a particular grade. That would be sort of my initial worry, but maybe that's not warranted at all. I don't know how that would be communicated and what kind of tools would be developed, and whether those tools can then be back engineered to produce something that perfectly matches what the tool expects.
I think in a way your worry is, I mean, it's interesting to worry about that, but as learners, they need to gradually, learn on the basis of models that they need to follow, and then the creativity may appear at a later stage. So having some sort of modeled, even if they're a bit, like clean and wrapped up and everything, is also one way of, progressively learning the language, and they need that, because so we have to pay attention to that, but it's not that worrying, I would say, to me, that having a model is okay, and building gradually. It's authentic also in a way that's the way you learn. You learn the basic things, and then you grow. And so this the type of authenticity Eric was mentioning. It's authentic in a particular context for a particular reason. And but it's interesting to keep that in mind as well. Yeah, sure.
All right, great.
I think for learners that
okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, sorry. The main thing to bring to the fore, and something I work on with my students and their teachers is to work on the context in which a word appears, collocations and patterns. So collocations and colligations for the grammar. And well, that's something very useful for the learners. And to me, that is authenticity too, to look at the environment around the word, in front, before the word occurs, and after the word then, and to get them to work on collocations. Something I would do, for example, in the classroom, is to give them printouts of concordances for a word and get them to look at the context, or for correcting essays while using corpus linguistics, or when looking at phrasal verbs, look at the particle and look at the environment of that particle that goes with a particular verb. So to me, really, what corpus linguistics revealed is the importance of clusters, that we do not use words in isolation, and native speakers don't speak in isolated words, but they speak in patterns and in chunks and lexical phrases. And bringing that to the classroom, I believe in raising language awareness of those collocations is so important for the student teachers and for the learners.
Yeah, I totally agree. And perhaps I would add to that. So really on top of that, I think what we can also teach learners, and in particular future teachers then with Corpora, is also differences between registers, or to start off with, maybe between different modes, but like that contextual information that we have thanks to the metadata in well-constructed corpora. And I think that's something that's not yet really common knowledge among many future teachers. So both the immediate context of a word, the collocations, the colligations, and the semantic prosody, that kind of thing, and then sort of at the meta level data, register differences between different language varieties, regional varieties, and just the variety that we have, variation that we have within language, I think is really helpful.
And I think level is so important too. So when we look up, or we Google the Sketch engine or English vocabulary profile, for example, so important for the learners too, very accessible, easy to use. I looked up, for example, compensate and compared it to the phrasal verb make up for, and then, well, the English vocab profile tells us that compensate is actually C1 level, and make up for is B2 level. And I think it's important to know for both learners and teachers too, to use that language in their speech, to see what's more frequent, more formal, as Ellen said. So register is also very important.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Joyce, I don't know if you have any questions from the audience or not yet.
I think we can go through some of the questions that we have there first, and then I'll chime in a bit.
Okay, great. Well, perhaps a general question again, because I think what we've or I've noticed at least is that from the responses and all the comments that corpus linguistics, corpora come in many shapes and sizes. So perhaps if I could ask you, what exact shape and size of corpus linguistics sparked your interest when coming into the field? What made you become a corpus linguist? What made you integrate corpora in your research activities? Perhaps as a next question.
Fanny, do you want to start that one?
Yes, I can start. So what made me discover corpus linguistics, so that was last century in 1990, and I was hired by Sylvia and Granger to start the collection of the International Corpus of Learner English. And in those days, you had to key in the text written by students and make sure that you didn't correct the mistakes that were in the text. So it was a different way of working with corpora, but it was fascinating because it really gave you, or gave me and us as a community, access to loads of texts, and for us it was great. I mean, what a big corpus was in those days is not what a big corpus is today, of course, but it was very interesting, and I was, and I'm still interested in the pedagogical applications that you could derive from those corpora. So what are the how do learners speak or write, and how can you help them? So that was the incentive for me, is what do they say, what do they write, and how can you help them improve? And so that was my incentive, and it still is my incentive, even though I'm using corpora differently these days, but that's another story. So I'll hand over to my colleagues. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Ellen, would you like to have a go?
Sure. I mean, I first came across corpora when I was working on my master's thesis, which was actually in interpreting studies, but I was interested in collocation as a phenomenon. Not that I knew much about it, but I did some research and found this whole strand of, well, this whole subdiscipline within linguistics that uses these mysterious corpora, and that was something that I found very interesting, that made sense to me. I think I nearly went and studied STEM. I applied for physics, and I think, you know, I by doing corpus linguistics, I can sort of keep working with numbers, and it matches my understanding of what good science can and should be. And I really like the combination that, in my view, good corpus linguistics is always this mixture of quantitative and qualitative analysis, and that we go back to the text, and that we're very wary of the kind of metadata that we have and don't have, and don't make assumptions if we don't have the appropriate data. And I just feel very at home in that setting and that mixture. So yeah, that's how I got started, and then I ended up applying for a PhD with a supervisor who works with corpus linguistic methods in order to learn more.
Well, if I can just add on to that, well, I wouldn't qualify myself as a corpus linguist, but rather as a practitioner or teacher trainer who uses corpora for language work and raising deeper language awareness. But for my research, PhD research, and as I was going to work on teacher talk, so the language that we teachers use in the classroom, native and non-native, there was no existing data available authentic data available at the time. Well, there was the BNC, and there was, in my case, academic speech, the spoken part of the BNC, or the base corpus for academic English, the spoken part of it, been working on interactive modes in the classroom. But I was very interested in the linguistic features of teacher talk. And so, as there was no existing corpus available at the time, I decided to build or assemble my own corpus. So I fell into corpus linguistics, so to speak, and I've enjoyed it ever since. And what is great is that the initial corpus which I assembled was nearly 170,000 small corpus, but then I've kept expanding to the corpus ever since. So the initial corpus, very small corpus, and then I came back to it because the first recordings, I actually went to lessons to observe teachers teaching. I recorded lessons, both in French-speaking Belgium and in Kent in England. And then that was for the initial PhD research. And then 2 years after that, I went back to Brighton for other recordings. And then 2 years after that, to Galway in Ireland to get a good sample of English too. And so what is great to corpus linguistics is that you can keep adding on to the corpus. It's work in progress. It's ongoing process all the time. And thanks to that, even though it's within the span changing, so words in the initial corpus like school diary has now totally disappeared because school diary is more electronic or a digital school diary. So there was that, or mobile phones was not that present in the initial corpus 12 years ago. It's much more present now, technological devices. So words have gone and other words have come into the corpus. And that's great about corpus linguistics, diachronically, is that you can see how within a few years span, how language is changing, is evolving. So right, that's the idea. Mm-hmm.
Perhaps I can just quickly react to what's something Fanny mentioned, which is the size of corpora, which have changed. I mean, they've grown exponentially, but at the same time, I think it's really important to stress that in corpus linguistics, bigger isn't necessarily better. And I mean, you can imagine that Eric's corpus, even though he's expanding it, is still a small corpus and is, however, extremely valuable because it is a very specific discourse. It's also tricky data to obtain, and so we're grateful for whatever we have. And I think it's really, really important to be aware of that, especially, well, for lots of research questions. If we want to have really reliable results, if we want to have precise results, then actually we may want to have less data, but with adequate metadata and well-collected, well-compiled corpora. And I think there is a danger there that there are sort of strands of research going on where in some cases it's just bigger, bigger, bigger. And actually we're not necessarily getting better answers. Just read an interesting chapter, and in a second I'll find the reference and put it in the chat, which compares, I think they were looking at A and N before a word that starts with H in English. So an hour or a hour, that alternation. And they looked at a small but well-constructed corpus and compared their results to results from the Ngram Google Books database. It's a huge database, but actually quite problematic because you don't know where the books come from. The metadata is messy. It's not accurate. I mean, Google doesn't have an interest in providing constructed research data. And that really does impact the quality of the results. So I think these kinds of methodological studies are really interesting and remind us that small, well-constructed corpora are extremely valuable. And it's not just progress doesn't just mean more and more and more words.
Fully agree. Yeah.
Yeah, about the size of corpus. corpora, it's O'Keefe and County in their books. It's a great book for an introduction to linguistics, but they make the point that if we know exactly what we want to investigate, small corpora are valid corpora, and often the findings that we have in small corpora are backed up by the findings of larger corpora. Something I found, for example, in the small corpus that I had for a teacher talk, is that modal verb forms are more frequently used to as a way of expressing hedging rather than as pure modal verb forms. For modality, so things like obligation or lack of obligation, certainty, probability, speakers refer more to lexical modality. So words like seem or sound or adjective, certain, or adverbs, possibly, presumably, more so than pure modal verb forms. And that is backed up indeed by the grammarians and by what O'Keefe and et al. Found in analyzing the bigger corpora. Similarly, for actions, well, apostrophe double is used more frequently by the native teachers than the non-native teachers, and that is backed up again by the larger corpora, the B and C. Picking up on that one of the great advantages of corpora is the ability to differentiate between spoken grammar and written grammar based on books, grammar books by and Cambridge Grammar of English, that we have the ability, thanks to corpus linguistics, to have these two grammars to speak and see what's the
The audio was not great, but I think we were still able to get the gist of it. Thank you,
sorry.
Eric. Any questions from the audience, or Fanny, Ellen, if you have anything to add?
There's a question in there from the audience.
Ah, great. Joyce, can you read, because I don't have the chat window.
No worries. I can.
Yeah, sorry, I'll read it. It's from Raimi. Do you typically supplement corpus research with acceptability judgment tests, especially with specific structures? For example, an hour versus a hour. I mean, I guess to answer the question, some researchers have done that. I think Stefan Gries has done work with that, with Stephanie Wolf, where they combine corpus techniques together with acceptability or and other kinds of judgment tests with specific structures, and they found that generally, you can use one set of data to support the other. But we'll leave this question open for the panelists.
I would say that this is not something that is typically done. So as Peter said, there are studies. One of my PhD students, Damien Littré, also worked with acceptability judgment tests for tense and aspect data, but it's not something that is typically done. And I think it's interesting when it's done, because it also gives you ideas on what people think is acceptable or not acceptable. And but maybe one thing that I would like to add, I was thinking whilst you were saying anything you want to add, I think that numbers and figures are interesting. But even if we have super solid stats telling you that this is the way language works, what I think we need to do is really help people understand how they can improve their own language, and not just by throwing the stats at them, because as we know, stats don't work. Otherwise, you know, the planet wouldn't be in that state. No one would be smoking anymore if stats worked well and if people were sensitive to stats. So I think what we need to do is really to take into account those stats, because they tell us a lot about language, but also invest way more than we actually do these days in explaining, in teaching, in helping people improve their language. So I think this is also talking about authenticity in a different way. I think it's authentic teaching. I mean, we need to really take those figures, learn from them, and help people improve the language, because too often you may see, okay, people say that more often than that. Yes, and so, you know, how do you change the language that people use? So I think anything is good, and that the question on acceptability judgment test make me think about that. So it's not because people say that other people will repeat it exactly the same way. So this balancing act between figures and teaching and helping people improve, and I think is really essential. Yeah.
I think what Fanny is saying, it ties very much with the idea of corpus literacy as well, that I think all three of us are involved in. Teaching students, and many of our students are future language teachers, how to use corpora, and for language learning purposes, but also to assess the language of their students, for instance. So we think there are lots of applications, but it's not easy to teach these skills, and in a way, we are teaching basic literacy, data literacy skills. So how do you interpret numbers? And I find that I have students who are not quite sure what a percentage is when I really ask and really make sure that they've understood the concept. So sometimes I'm thinking we're teaching life skills for a start with corpora, but also we're really teaching important skills. And if you teach them well, then actually have students who question some of the easier tools that we also teach them. So I think Eric mentioned SCALE. Is that what you mentioned? I'm not sure, because the audio was a little bit difficult, but I think I heard SCALE at some point, which is a great tool, but doesn't include any metadata. So we don't really know, it's web data, but we're not quite sure where exactly. And I've had students, because they've attended my classes, and then I tell them, look, this is a great tool. And they think, yes, but Ellen, where's this data coming from? And and they're right to be wary, because in some cases it really does come up with some weird results, because, for example, I've noticed there are a lot of religious texts in there. And so for some words and some collocates, you end up with quite odd things, unless you're writing a sermon, you won't need that collocation. So I think that's important. And in terms of acceptability judgments, I think many corpus linguists don't use them. We can combine them, but I think most of us go out from the premise that we're interested in what people do produce, as opposed to what they think is good or not good, or acceptable or not acceptable. Of course, it's very interesting to combine that data, but it gives us different insights. And we're very often interested in what is actually produced. That said, I think in terms of corpus literacy, what is really interesting is to teach future teachers, or in-service teachers for that matter, and to make them reflect on their norms and what they consider acceptable or not acceptable, especially when we look at different registers. So there are things that their students might say which are very, very common in spoken English and are totally acceptable in the States or in England or Australia or wherever. And maybe that's just a norm that they've been accustomed to, that they've grown up with themselves. And by looking at actual data, they might then be encouraged to change some of these judgments that they have on certain constructions. But it's a difficult thing to achieve. I can speak from experience that changing norms and changing these sorts of beliefs among teachers, probably among all human beings, is tough.
Well, thank you
very much. Remy, please go ahead.
No, I just wanted to thank them for the.
Okay, great. Thank you for your question. Yeah, I don't know, Joyce, any other questions from the audience? Otherwise, I still have time for one or two more questions. Because when you were talking about the what teachers, what students should have as far as corpus literacy skills are concerned, Ellen, I thought maybe next question. If you look at the technological developments from the past few decades, and perhaps a disclaimer beforehand, it's by no means a reflection of my own opinion. It's just yeah, an open question to start a discussion. So if you look at the technological developments, especially then the rise of artificial intelligence, should a teacher who uses corpora, should students who use corpora, should corpus linguists as researchers possess technological skills that go beyond just being able to use corpus managers like Skill, like Sketch, and like AntConc? Should they have a basic understanding of neural networks, for example, basic programming skills, whatever? And then as far as students are concerned, should the instruction of those skills be integrated to some extent in the curricula? Should it become part of language studies? Perhaps food for thought for the next question.
I think yeah, I think this would probably be too demanding. I mean, it would be good, of course, if everyone were a good linguist and a statistician and a programmer and so but I think it's probably not that easy to get. So what I would say is that to me at least, and everyone can disagree with me, but to me at least, I think what matters is that people understand, learners, students understand how language works and perhaps how systems work and how the language is analyzed by machines and what sort of language is produced by machine. As long as I understand that not all of them need to be programmer or anything, but they need to know what it means, to speak, to write, to combine things. And so I think it would be good if we were all programmers and stuff like that, but we won't be. So I think understanding how the language works and all those digital competencies. I mean, there is the CEF for language competencies. You have DigiComp Edu for digital competencies and understanding how systems works and tools work. So I think we need more digital competencies, that's for sure. And there's also different levels of competencies, digital competencies. So I think we should know more about. We should be digitally competent, and there are various levels, and not everyone will get to the top level, but I think understanding how language works will prevent people from being exploited, and they will pay attention to the type of language we give them and what information they get from machines and language. So I think I would say digital competence, yes, not everyone will be a programmer, but understanding how it works. It's like stats, basically. Sometimes you cannot do the stats yourself, but you understand what it means, what the result means. And even if you can't do it yourself, you should understand more or less the inference that the stats is making. But so that would be my answer after two seconds of thinking. So sorry if it's a bit unclear.
I would agree with Fanny, and I have to apologize because I think I lost you at some point. The connection was not very good. I should have picked a more expensive hotel. Sorry about that. But I would agree with you that the first thing, I think I understand where it comes from. And the first thing is to be aware of corpus linguistics. I don't think everybody needs to do it. And if we're using materials that are corpus informed, as long as we know what that means exactly, what language data it's based on, and what it's being used for, we don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. So, and do the analysis ourselves. So it's just about finding the best way to incorporate corpus linguistics into our lessons. And I think this is something that there's an article written by Angela Chambers from University of Limerick, who said that corpus linguistics has only indirectly entered the classroom. It has entered the classroom via books, so dictionaries and grammar books, but not directly yet. So the corpus revolution, she says, is still underway. So it's only indirectly that corpus linguistics has entered the classroom so far. It's still going on. There's a great book which I can recommend, because actually 2 readings. The first one is From Corpus to Classroom by O'Keefe and et al. And there's the new book. I don't know if you can see the cover there. Just published, Teaching English with Corpora, and Ellen and I have contributed a chapter in that book. And so 2023, but Van der Vienna, who edited the book, makes the same point, is that corpus linguistics hasn't hit the classroom yet. And that book, Teaching English with Corpora, by giving all kinds of practical applications, tends to address those issues.
Yeah, I entirely agree. I would say we really do need to differentiate between students and teachers, in-service, pre-service teachers, and then researchers. These are completely different uses of corpora, and therefore require different skill sets, I think. So in terms of for schools, I would see, or I see corpus literacy as part of data literacy, and I teach the use of corpora just like I teach the use of search engines, which is, most people assume they know how to use search engines, but when you look at their behavior, it's not necessarily very efficient. Like the use of teaching how to use dictionaries, teaching how to use the index of a textbook. These are skills that we need to teach, and among them I would include using corpora whenever it's appropriate, obviously. There are different tools that are appropriate for different learners and in different contexts. So for me, that's part of data literacy, and it's becoming more and more important. And I think we need to teach that, in particular now that we have these AI systems that are complete black boxes, and I don't think need to go into the science of what is exactly neural modeling or God knows what in schools, but we need the students to understand that this comes from data that we don't really know where the data is, and this is a black box, as opposed to these tools where we do have checks which have been edited or which are compiled and according to specific criteria, where we can be more certain of the results that they produce. And I think students are perfectly capable of making these differences and then learning the advantages and disadvantages of various tools. So I think that is important. Then for researchers, I agree with Fanny in the sense that we can't all be experts in everything. I just think that's unrealistic. Unfortunately, I feel sometimes that is what academia expects of us, increasingly, but I think we need to reject that idea. And it is a problem that the PhD is a solo work to a great extent. So at that stage, at least, you're expected to do things more or less by yourself, at least in the humanities. But I think, so on the one hand, I think we need to build expertise, both in terms of tools, so technological and statistical competences as well. I think that should be part of what we learn as we're doing a PhD. And this is very different. So I did my PhD in Germany. There were no courses whatsoever. So you have to teach yourself all of these things. And in other places, there are courses and things are compulsory. And if that's how things are structured, then it's great to have those built in to a program. And even if people are not using the methods themselves, not using the tools, so not programming themselves or not using complex stats themselves, it's super important to be able to understand those in order to read papers, in order to read the literature that's out there. So I think there are no excuses for not being involved to a certain extent. That said, we can't all be experts, and I would hope that in the future we have more team science, we have more projects where One person is in to bring in more of the pedagogical experience, expertise based in the classroom, which is often missing in many projects, unfortunately. And then we have someone who brings in the statistical expertise or the corpus building expertise and work together to create something that is good science. I mean, that's the only way I can describe it. But I think we need to move away from the idea that that we're all geniuses and that we can do everything, because this worked at the time of Leonardo da Vinci, but science has become so much more complicated nowadays that it's just not realistic. So that's what worries me, that we have a lot of, certainly I see in Germany, that German academia is quite individualistic, and it's, your progress is based on what you as an individual has produced. And I just don't think that will produce good quality, useful corpus linguistics.
And maybe as a follow-up to what Ellen is saying, I think, this is my pet topic, but I think that too often we tell people, okay, teachers need to do corpus linguistics, and they need to be statisticians, and they need to understand the language, etc., etc. And it's very often a top-down thing from linguists to teachers telling them what to do, and we expect them to have all sorts of types of expertise, but we don't take pedagogy into account enough. So I would also plead for people to become experts in pedagogy, because otherwise, as a corpus linguist, you can recommend things that you believe are interesting as a linguist, and they are interesting, but they may not be useful for teachers. So I think it's so important to have this teacher-researcher collaboration, and we need to also listen to teachers. What would be useful for you? And then maybe we can provide solutions, and not just think that our solutions will de facto be useful for teachers. And so that they need that, to me, the teacher researcher collaboration should really be a circular one and not a top down. We linguists are telling you what to do, but please, what can we do for you? Or do you need us? Or no, maybe the answer is we don't need that, and fine, depending on the context. So
perhaps I can do a tiny bit of self-promotion. I'm working on a podcast at the moment that is with a teacher. So it's a conversation between a language teacher and myself, and she tells me about some of the issues that she has, and we try and find solutions in a corpus. And it's very interesting because she doesn't have the kinds of problems that I was expecting necessarily. She has some questions that I definitely cannot answer with a corpus. And I make some assumptions as to what's going to be very difficult for her, and it's very easy for her. and so this is a really interesting conversation that we're having. I'm not sure when we'll get round to actually publishing any of this stuff, but for now it's been a very enlightening for me.
Good. Glad to hear that. Go on, Ellen. Go on.
Yeah. Is there a link available already? Otherwise, you can post it in the chat.
We've recorded 2 episodes so far, and we haven't decided when we're going to post them. And things are a bit tricky because this teacher friend has now got a new position, so I'm not sure whether we'll be able to record many more, but maybe with other teachers, other volunteers.
Okay. But keep us posted in any case.
Will do, yeah.
I was going to say, can you hear me okay? Because sometimes the connection is not very stable and solid. Thank you. Was it only to look at, for example, books or dictionaries and get the learners to realize what corpus is based on, and then maybe go on and look at the corpus? And the same goes for teachers. Was it only that? I think it's a way to bring in corpus linguistics into the classroom, because then having a textbook in front of us, which is corpus based, is already a pedagogical application of the corpus. I think it's a good way to introduce corpus linguistics and bring it to...
We've lost Eric.
Yeah.
I'm
If
back.
we-
Sorry.
Yeah, you're
I
back.
lost you for 30 seconds. No, I'm back. Sorry about this. I'm in Harrogate in north of England, a lovely part of England, but internet connection is not very good.
Okay, well, I think it's almost time to wrap things up. It's 1 o'clock and time.
The
Well,
mountains,
just
the hills of England. Can you hear me back now? Are you okay?
now we can. Yeah.
I didn't hear what you said, Jasper, but anyway.
No, I said it was time to wrap things up. I think since
Okay.
it's already past 1 o'clock, but yeah, I think personally I joined the webinar really much. Just flew by in an instant. So I just want to thank you all for your great inputs, and I think on perhaps to end on a cliche about the last question, that I guess teamwork makes the dream work in academia, in combining pedagogy, programming, corpus linguistics, etc., research in one team, and just not to expect to do it all on your own, because working in a team can be very enriching experience, I think. So that would be the conclusion for me, and I guess now I hand over to Joyce to close the session officially.
Yeah, thank you, Jasper, so much for moderating, and also to our speakers, Fanny, Eric, and Ellen, for your time as well. Yeah, really great conversation. I really enjoyed just a little bits of a lot of different topics that we touched upon today, especially I think I definitely resonate with data literacy and understanding what it means to use data correctly, especially as we enter this new era of AI. It's become so easy to just input, to query something, and then to get, a 5-paragraph essay on whatever it is, right? So really being able to understand, to use authentic data, or data that really does produce reliable result. And that's sort of where corpus linguistics kind of fall under. So I'm glad that we will still exist for the time being, that we won't be consumed by AI. But anyway, we are a little bit over time. So I want to thank you, everybody, especially our speakers. Again, Fanny, Eric, and Ellen, and also Jasper for moderating, and then also for everyone else for your contribution and for being here. This session will be recorded and be uploaded on YouTube in a few days. So if you did sort of miss out on certain things and you want to check back, you can definitely do that. Thank you so much again, and have a great day, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for the
you.
invitation. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Great to
Bye.
see you. Really good conversation, and let's share the recording far and wide.
Yes.
Good.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.